to the stream. Doing Tomodachi Life again. Gonna not fuck it up this time. Microphone works. Headphones on. Let's just get straight to it. So it's the 10th day. So here we go. We got me, got Alex, my real life wife and game wife, Batman, Superman, Lois, Lex Luthor. Let's just go to the list. Superman, Lois, there's Joker, Luthor, Firestorm, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn are married. Superman and Lois are married. They had a Superboy baby. And me and Alex are married. We said no to babies. There's Wonder Woman, Gnort, Comics Face, Tiny. These are my characters if you don't know. Superboy. It's the only born baby on the island, Morpho. He's in his swimming outfit. This must be in a sprinkler or something. There's Robin. Had to put Robin in there. Forgot Superboy. Darkseid. John Johns. Martian Manhunter. Aquaman and Supergirl. I also made the whole Justice here. Trying to create a Justice League. Right now the roster is Batman, Firestorm, Gnort, which is it's fine for me. Right. Today, we'll see what we do.
Ahoy, hoy, other husband.
I made Alex really loud.
I've been considering changing up my hairstyle.
Good.
What sort of hairstyle would be good on me?
So I did this happened for me. I wanted a different hairstyle, and I think I chose artistic, and that wasn't. But let's see what happens.
Okay, then I'll
Doesn't
change
happen
my
instantly.
hairstyle
It'll happen
soon.
tomorrow.
Look forward to the new me.
As always, how are my levels?
I want to go see a movie with Lois.
A movie? No. I don't think that exists here. Alright. Everyone's hungry. Everyone gets zucchinis today, they're on special.
Yum, yum, yum.
Didn't like him. Have some dessert.
Yum, yum, yum.
So I think I'd like to have the whole Justice League roster, which means I need to add the founding members. Flash and Green Lantern. It's very dude heavy. It's very sausage festival island, but what are you gonna do? I'd like to add Batgirl, and I'd like to put Catwoman in there. But also I don't want to make it too Batman heavy.
Oh, I feel a little different.
Who else is Batman? Come on, man. I was just there.
I'm Batman. I feel like I could use a style update.
It's
You
this
know,
thing about
something
doing
new to
custom
wear.
everything. They do ask for the clothes. Could I put something on his head? Or maybe even like a necklace. No, I don't think I want to mess it up. That would look pretty cool though. I'm sorry.
I feel
So
like
say
I
no.
could use a style update. You know, something new to wear.
You look great.
Oh, you think? Well, I guess all I needed was a compliment. Thanks. I'll keep wearing this.
So I was excited about putting my own characters in here, but
I was up all night thinking about Green
Really
Lantern
done.
comics.
just keep thinking of more characters I love to put in. Batman loves Rice Cracker.
Just like Alfred makes.
So I'm loving the game. I'm playing it every day, as much as I can. Look at him, he loves it. Not his absolute favorite though. I haven't found that yet. See, this is the only bit where it's updating the characters. So far, he's got all the codes I want. Could give him a sword. Expressions. So we got greeting, sad, angry, eating, sleeping, happy. Don't have a happy one. We never know what Batman says when he's happy. Here we go.
I'm as happy as a bat. I'm as happy as a bat. I love it. That expression pretty much sums up who I am as a person.
Alright, I would like to keep him as a second. Drink.
Just like Alfred makes.
See what Alex is doing again. Let's get
Doc.
that game.
Let's play Pixel Quiz.
Elite Gaming.
Here's your first pixelated item. What do you think it is?
That's Coral. Yeah.
The answer is coral. Next up, your second pixelated item. What do you think it is?
Homemade chocolates. Yeah.
The answer is handmade chocolates.
Still haven't seen that in the shop.
And finally, the last pixelated item. What do you think it is?
Come on. Gotta be pancakes.
The correct answer is pancakes. Congratulations, you won.
Let's
Time
toss
for-
one. Alright. What's going on now?
Art, come on.
I've never seen this happen indoors before.
Who put an I've magazine here?
So I'm hoping there's a big group of people talking rather than gotta check on everyone.
Huh?
He's gonna want to build
Do
something
you
stupid.
have a moment? I would just love it if there were a flower plant right here.
It's fine. So Joker was obsessed with Harley Quinn, and then she got married, and he was fine
Well,
with it.
that's a big improvement. Ha ha.
Alright, who else we got? He's gonna be looking at some ants. This is different. I think I've seen that. What's Firestone doing? Firestone lives in the gym, he's a big jock.
Huh? Yo, I
And a
think
team.
Suits and Metamorpho would be best friends.
Yes. I agree.
What should we talk about to help them get along?
What do they have in common? It's just gonna be superhero stuff, isn't it? Yeah, we go.
Got it? I'll go round up
I
Suits
tried
and
to give
Metamorpho.
Firestorm a flame hat that glows, but it looked a bit rubbish. Maybe I'll try again.
Rex, say hello to Suits. Suits, this is Metamorpho.
Do you feel like talking about fighting crime? Sure, but tell me, Superman, how good are you at
These
fighting
outfits
crime?
are so good. I'm really proud of
I
them.
don't want to brag or
Okay,
anything,
Firestorm.
but I don't think you'll find anyone on all of Supertown who's better at fighting crime than me. Last year, I came in first in the island's great fighting crime competition. Oh, don't mind me while I remove my foot from my mouth.
Oh, that reminds me. So, I heard that Suits was only 3 years old when he started fighting crime.
That's canon.
Is that right?
That was canon at some point.
Whoa, you know, maybe we do have a lot to
Super
talk
Baby was a
about
thing.
after all. I bet we could be good friends.
That worked out. I don't want Superman living in the Hall of Justice though. There's a good Superman house happening right now. I think he calls him Soups.
Sups, how goes it?
Nope.
Sups, want to hang out? Hey, Soups,
Yeah. But not to everyone. He calls
have you seen?
And Superman calls him Rex.
Rex, want to hang?
But to other people,
Have you seen?
yeah, more fair.
Thanks to Firestorm, Rex and I have become fast friends. Yeah, grab and snap elbow. Hit it kept rolling.
Can't play a game.
How about a quick game of no repeats? No repeats. Food. Gratin.
Play keys.
Frozen yogurt.
The stir-fried tomato and eggs
Stuffing.
looks really good.
Scrambled eggs. Space food.
Greek salad.
Mussels.
Pretzel.
Cheeseburger.
Mango.
Rice cracker.
Mashed potatoes.
Greek salad. Ah, Greek salad is a repeat.
You missed
That
it.
was a miraculous rally, dear. Congratulations, you won.
So let's go middle. Oh well.
Gotta keep everything under control.
So who else? What's Comics Face up to? Yeah, just put 2 of my characters in there, and they got married. Fell in love.
Huh? Good seeing you, you heard?
I don't like that hat. I gotta take that
I want
off.
to gather the Gatsby fan club to express
Oh.
our appreciation to life, you heard? What should we say?
It's so weird when you have to write it about yourself. Let's do one of these.
Keep up the good work? Let's do this.
It's boring, but it's
We have
really good.
something we want to say to you,
jumpsuit. I
you
like it.
heard?
What's going on? This is out of the blue.
Keep up the good work?
Keep up the good work.
Keep up the good work.
It's my bowl of burgers.
I'm so touched that you'd all say something like that to me. My heart is so full, it may just burst. Grappling snap.
I'm
Huh?
gonna take that out of him.
Mister? Hey,
I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. What do I do? This one. This one. This one. Oh yeah.
I've had the best laugh.
Hee hee.
We were swapping corny jokes, and his laugh was just making me laugh even harder, you heard? You know, I feel like you and I have become very
Oh.
close, mister, you heard? Can I give you a special nickname that only I will use?
None of cap. Hey, Clary, welcome to the game. I'm good, thanks. How are you? You enjoying Tomodachi Life? What do you get? A character that you made up. What do they call you? Creator sounds a bit wanky, but look.
Creator, how's it going?
Nah, I can't do that. Too gross. How are my levels? Tell me, answer any question and so I know if you're a bot or not, I guess. He's gonna call me Games Face.
Game Space, how's it going?
Did you do that art for your own panels too?
Game Space, It feels
I
so
drew
natural
pretty much
calling you that.
everything you see.
I'm so glad we've become good friends, you heard?
What do you mean by panels?
Howdy.
Has a gallon, tiny.
Jorpy.
How'd you hear that?
Yeah.
It's the one with the
Jointable.
Australian accent.
Baba Crackle.
Hey,
Dalla Dalla.
put in. So I haven't done a whole lot of custom. I've done a lot of the costumes, but no, I've done a fair bit. I was going through one by one. I haven't made a TV show yet for them to watch.
Aw.
I haven't made any.
Glad
kind
that
of
was only a dream.
paths.
Tee hee hee. Oh. What's up? Ha ha ha. If I'm being honest, I could be a better listener. Tee hee hee.
You could do with some food.
Hoo ha ha.
Thank you. I honestly haven't been streaming much lately. Like, this is the game that got me kind of interested in regular again. So for the future, yeah. Mostly Nintendo, mostly this. But I play some PC games. I haven't touched a PlayStation in a while, but any game where you can draw stuff inside, like, that's great. And it would be nice to start streaming some not game stuff, some drawing. I can't see that happening. I really should. This should be my reward. Chicken kiwi.
Ha ha ha. I feel a bit more like myself. Tee hee hee.
What kind of games do you play? Are you also a streamer? Yeah, I haven't done a lot of 3D stuff in a while. I was doing Womp, and then I think the problem with that was I paid for the pro account and then didn't use it enough, and
Ooh, ha,
now
ha.
I have to go back to the free account. And I usually just draw my own stuff. Not really game. If I'm doing fan art, it'll be comic related, not really games fan art. I did do a lot of Animal Crossing stuff at the time. But I'm working on a tabletop game that needs me to be doing a lot of drawing. I reckon I'm more than 3. 3/4 through. So I'm trying to get Superboy and Robin to be best friends.
What's the matter? Body? Won't ma move? Oof, I've never seen a case this bad before.
I think all my 3D stuff was.
I'm gonna be
my own.
okay though.
I didn't really
Right.
do fan art for that.
You're a real lifesaver. What a relief. You're okay.
I'm really happy with that, Robin. I really struggled there. It turned out okay. Wish you could change the
Now I'm
hands,
close
but
to
I would
Robin.
say.
And it's all thanks to you, Mr.
Cool. That's everyone's problems. I still need to feed a lot of. No, you. It's the first time I've seen the knitting animation. It's nearly up to 100. Yeah, Womp for me, it's a good I'm doing that all art myself. Wump is a good chill out thing for me. Just kind of not having any real goal. Like, yeah, it's kind of sketchbooky in that sense. So I don't know. I've kind of unlocked everything. No, I haven't. There's still rooms. So I want to know why these are grey and don't say complete. I reckon there's going to be more options at some point. Yeah, my tabletop game. I lost steam on it a bit. Especially, I kind of let myself, leading up to this game, kind of let myself get obsessed and not do work. And then,
Take a break.
but then I did a playtest recently, and so that got me excited again. And something coming up soon. Oh, it's after. Wait,
Welcome.
no. I think
Not
this is
gonna
it.
buy anything.
The thing about the game, it feels weird sharing stuff that would be spoilers if you were gonna play it. But I mean, it is creep. But I need to just not care about that. Is this my island? A little beach walkway I'm a fan of. A little bell.
I'm a good person.
What did she say?
Yeah, I love the sea.
Got my toilets there. Doing text on these texts just kind of sucks. She's gonna do it. She's gonna do it. I've done a I haven't done a lot of streaming of drawing. I have probably, I reckon, definitely less than 5 times. Like, I really should. It's a good way to. Oh no, what have I done here? It's a good way. What's the word? You get how, like, make sure you're kind of doing one thing at a time, kind of holding yourself accountable. If I start drawing on stream, I'm not gonna walk off, until it's kind of done. But yeah, if that's something people are interested in, I should do it anyway. If people are into it, they'll find it. Just get Aquaman lives on the beach right near the lighthouse. Metamorpho, John Jones. There's the Hall of Justice. It's the Superman's house. Sticky Institute sells scenes in Melbourne. Art stream Zag. Yeah, I like art streams. I feel like I don't watch them unless I'm also drawing. You got a favorite thing to draw when you do stream it? I think when I'm streaming, it's never really drawing for myself. If you know, it's like I have something I have to do. It's weird to call it work, but if I have deadlines or something, so it's. I think the last thing I drew on stream was some creepy stuff for Halloween, little Halloween zine event we got going here. Ghosts, it was. That was a long time ago. But it is cool, and then when I kind of show it off, people have had people say, "Oh, I watched you draw that." That's kind of fun. I guess, yeah, if I was watching something and then saw that for sale, yeah, I don't know. I'd feel kind of cool. I'd feel a bit special that I was there. Calling it work is the best way to actually get it done. I don't know if I agree. I haven't used X in a long time. Obvious reasons. My Instagram. Do I have have that graphic here. I don't. And my Nightbug doesn't seem to be working. Sir, I'm the same username as here, Sir Ive on Instagram. I don't know what the last drawing you would see there. If you go there right now, you'd see Tomodachi Life things. I appreciate asking about drawing. I feel pretty good about it. Where's this gonna go? Oh, this is awful here. Oh yeah, I've.itch.io. Mostly digital stuff. The thing is, shipping anything. Thank you. On Instagram? Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the follow. It is funny to, yeah, I just kind of got very used to not drawing or posting anything for a while. I have a Discord that I do not use. Or am I just generally on Discord? I am on Discord. I don't know how. I'm a bit of a dunce at it. I have a Discord for my channel, but I could not tell you how to. There's nothing there. Digital something. I do like Discord. That's not the problem. It's more, especially if it's about myself. It doesn't feel very so. I think I'm too used to other social media stuff, you know. Where it's like, hey, all right, I'll check my Discord right now. Oh, here we go. How did you find me? Pending. Accept. Accept. Cool. Done. Friends. How's this? You're making me think about the things I need to draw. Which is good. Oh, things aren't lining up. I'm trying not to be strict about symmetry and stuff, but look how ugly. Let's put these somewhere. I was just checking if I could put a thing on the ground there. So what else am I hating? There's this bit. That's for another time. This is where I live, and I've got little floating signs, and I have a big yard. I think I'm good with Let's look at our stats. "14 M's, 1 F, 6 F's, 1 NB." That's terrible. 4 couples, 4 marriages. Hey, what's this? I'm not using very much land. Does that? I thought that meant there's a shop that I'm not using, but that's not. Oh, that's right. I was gonna give him a lot of fish. That's a good one, though.
Huh. Welcome to the home of Team Metropolis.
Can I feed this boy?
I want to be friends with Batman. What should we talk about? What did you have in mind?
Look, you both love Robin. But then it becomes lingo, and then the actual character talks about themselves weirdly. I don't like it. Scene making.
Got it. I'll go talk to him about scene making. Hey, Batman. Do you feel like talking about scene making?
Sure, but tell me,
Thanks for the
Superboy,
follow.
how good
I
are you
didn't
at
see
scene
that
making?
happen.
I don't want to brag or anything, but
That should
I don't
have
think you'll
been-
find anyone on all of Supertown who's better at
Hopefully.
scene making than me.
That's amazing. I really respect folks who are good at scene making. Wanna be friends?
No problem. These two go make zines together. He would use his real name. Team.
Hey, Jonathan, long time.
Banana with other people.
Superboy,
Nice. Feels nice. I knew scene making would bring Batman and me together.
I hope Jonathan shows me all the tricks of the trade.
Alright, what do we got? We got grading. We got all this.
I speak.
Activities. Kids love laptops. So do you stream, Clary?
Thank you.
Or just to watch
What's
it?
the one? Yeah, rabbit snap elbow. Ship.
Hey, mister. How's it going? I'm hungry.
Okay.
Yum. What's the key to being the most interesting person in the room?
You're gonna get dessert.
Oh, great idea. As long as I look cool, I don't actually have to work on myself to be cool. Thanks.
You're gonna get dessert. dad
Yum.
loves rice crackers. Doesn't mean anything. Alright. I wanted to add a Batgirl. I wanted to do some palette stuff. This is all the drawing I do these days. So I haven't made a video for people to watch. I was thinking, alright, it has this. Let's see if anyone can figure out what I'm trying to do here. That's terrible. Whoa. That's my Discord beeping in my ear. How do I close Discord? This is what I mean when I'm very old. I don't know what I'm doing. I will answer your chats off stream. Discord chats. But the tabletop game, that is, yes, that's my own thing. I used to, I used to be making comics and zines, and then, I don't know, I still make zine. I'm not swearing off, I didn't stop. I just started doing other things that take way longer. Look at that bit there. It's not showing alright. That's so bright. Who should I put there? So, we've got Batman here. Oh, this is gonna suck to draw. I did a comics face thing on the Switch template, and I just realized I'm doing the exact same pose for that. This is perfect. If I put the stamp back on, just so it's in front of the body. Perfect. And then, hang on. See what it is? It's me. It's me. I'm live streaming. I'm live streaming Tomodachi Life. And let's pretend that the chat's going off. And in the Tomodachi Life, Batman is getting... Oh, what does Batman like? He loves crackers. That's as small as I can make it. Yeah, I'm happy with that. It is. So, I did have an extra keyboard plugged into this, but by the time I get it, is there a space in my username? I should know that. I don't know. So live stream.
Survive live stream.
I wish it would bring back what I typed, so I'd have to type it all over again. So, live space stream.
Survive live stream.
Content. Funny? Challenging? It's not embarrassing. Look, I'm gonna say it's funny. Yeah. That's the closest. That sounds like what it is. No. No. That's close. That sounds like yeah.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
Can't give that to myself, though. Dawn's upset.
Okay, fine. Hi. I was talking to Comic Space, but it kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
How about this? I'd like to change her walk. Oh, she's got to wait a minute. Why? Alright, that's fine. I already did that. She's graceful.
I feel like I'm becoming my true self more and more.
I don't know what to feed her.
Yum.
Graceful's so slow. You get a dessert. Okay. Little treat. Oh, wait a minute. Creme brulee.
Yum.
Huh? I'm so glad you want to chat, you heard? I want to be friends with Harley Quinn, you heard?
Sure.
What should we talk about?
Comics. Making jokes.
Got it. I'll go talk to her about making jokes, you heard?
Not a fan of his room.
Hey, Harley Quinn? Do you feel like talking about making jokes?
Okay, but check this out. Visualize making jokes. Who do you want to join you?
I mean, it's not just because you're asking, but I'd pick you, you heard?
Oh. Well, in that case, I'm gonna pencil you in for making jokes ASAP.
It's all good.
Nice. I knew making jokes would bring Harley Quinn and me together, you heard?
Makes sense. Comic Space and I have the same taste in
Gonna make a
hobbies,
Batgirl
so
when
no
there's-
wonder we hit it off. Tee-hee-hee.
When there's not so many things to deal with. This guy's got room for quirks. Or maybe not. Don't like any of these. His face is too beautiful. Raised eyebrow doesn't have eyebrow.
I speak with a loud voice. I speak.
You should be loud.
Oh, I feel a little different, you heard? Oh, blue devil.
Oh, grape game.
Feeling sharp. Wanna play no repeats with a group of folks. No repeats. Food. Edamame.
Yule log.
Rice pudding.
String cheese.
Sauerkraut. Haven't seen that in this game.
Roast chicken.
Or that.
Cracker.
Popcorn.
Gelatin snack.
Torrijas.
What is torrijas? That sounds good.
Macaroni and cheese.
Ratatouille.
Zucchini. Today's zucchini day. It was on special.
Pretzel.
Everyone's eating
Buttered
it.
potato.
Buttered potato was a repeat. That was on a whole nother level. Congratulations, you won. Time for your prize.
Big prize. I already got that. Oh, what's happening with that command?
Care to play red light, green light?
Sure.
Here we go. Green light. Red
I've
light.
screwed this up the last few times.
Green light. Red light. Green light. Red light.
Alright, now just be still. He's gonna fake me out. Yeah. And now. Yeah.
Green light. Well done, mister. You win. Congratulations, you won. Time for your prize.
Let's go back to small. I've got all these things. Alright. I'll get to making Batgirl.
Huh. Hello. I've been thinking lately that Superman
Yeah.
and I could get to know each other better.
So I put
Do you
them
think
down as
Superman and I would make a
relatives,
good team?
but There wasn't a cousin option, but
Really? Well, maybe there is something there.
yeah, you still gotta create the thing. I put Robin in as Batman's son, but it doesn't really-
Apparently, Phototomo Photography lets you organize custom photo shoots. I think you should take some pictures of me. After all, I'm your favorite, right? No need to answer.
She's so cool. You should try mac and cheese.
Yum.
And dessert.
Yum.
Thank you, Tommy. I just made her. So let's keep it flowing. How did you find this stream?
I feel like I'm becoming my true self more and more.
Welcome. So she's sorted. Superman's got some issues. You know what? Let's get Supergirl back in. Yeah. Are you playing? Are you watching? Are you also playing? No. Let's get in there. Grab you. Grab you. cousin.
What's going on here?
I just can't move.
Okay, now hold still. Here
Are
we
you
go.
having it? Are you,
What does that mean?
what's going on your island? I still haven't put a kryptonite
You're so
in. I'm gonna
kind.
give that to
It was no trouble at all.
Ringle checks demand.
Alright, what's going on here?
Short, flippin' grass, tomato.
So we got Batman, Poison Ivy, Joker, Firestorm.
Tony dreamt who Billy food.
Let's do the wishing fountain. Ah, nice. Thank you. It's all I've been doing. So you're playing. Do you know why these are grey and not complete? These are complete because I have them all. I have all these too, but I'm getting close to all the rooms as well. Yeah, like I have bought all of them. I'm guessing more are gonna show up though. Metamorph is not doing well.
Huh? Hi, I guess. I was talking to Firestorm, but
Yeah.
things just didn't
I
click.
reckon once I'm near 100, maybe that does something. You've got all of these things. Give you a flip out when angry. Yeah, but also
I feel like I'm
bits that
getting
are
closer to
complicated
who I
than
truly am.
it's very yeah, I don't know. It's hard to
Superman
explain.
and I became friends through Firestorm's introduction.
Did I tell you? a lot?
Firestorm really helped the conversation flow. What a pal.
No, you're hungry. Mac and cheese.
Yum.
I love the animations. Alright, who's... Firestorm's got issues.
Huh? Do you have a moment?
Nachos and apples.
I would just love it if there were a sprinkler right here.
Sure. I can't say no, even though I don't want a sprinkler. I don't like them changing out of their outfits.
Well, that's a big improvement.
He's gonna change into his wetsuit. I don't like it. Oh, you hated it. Why'd you
Not gonna lie, I'm pretty refreshed.
friggin' asked for it. Alright. Harley and Poison Ivy are married, and they live in Arkham Asylum. I'm glad he did like it.
I've been keeping this in for a
Just
while.
made him look scared.
Couldn't I borrowed some of your clothes without asking? Then I lost them.
Who needs clothes anyway?
Come forth, rascal. Who farted a moment ago?
What?
I thought it would come out quiet.
Sorry.
Sorry.
They both farted.
I'm not mad or anything, but who ordered all the boxes filled with video game soundtracks?
Was it me?
Brain patch wants you. How should I put this? I'm having a friend over to hang out, so could you make yourself scarce?
Consider me gone.
Imagine saying that to your wife. This is Arkham Asylum. That's how it is from the outside. They're welcome to go in and out anytime. Alright, no one's asking for anything. I gotta do this. $98. Thanks. I had an expansion today, and yeah, I just did a bunch of stuff. So what do I do? Just tickets? I've been playing an awful lot. Yeah, all I can really buy is tickets. That's fine. I haven't been doing much at all. Latin America. So trying to get Robin close with Batman or Superboy. But whenever I take him in here, he goes by himself. Buy to the store, that's correct. Did you go to the store? Oh, well. I've bought everything I can at the store.
Are you really giving me a Latin America tour?
Let's have a look after this.
Thank you so much.
Take
Time
someone.
to pack my bags.
Take someone, please, Robin. No. The whole point of these is they build up
Nice to meet you,
relationships.
Machu Picchu. Say cheese.
I'm really happy with the Robin. That was the one I struggled with the most. I tried to give him.
No one warned me the
skirt.
Amazon had chains.
Never.
Say cheese.
Fighting Killer Croc.
Easter Island's famous Moai statues. Whatever they're looking at must be pretty interesting.
I'm gonna stop
Say cheese.
sending him on trips. No, I don't want them.
That was a wonderful trip. Thanks so much for letting me take it. I have a souvenir for you.
Oh. Oh, I don't know what that is. Alright, no one else has problem. Let's go to the store. But when you unlock a thing in the fountain, you get one anyway. Don't need to buy it. See, like I've got these already. Yeah, same as the Rainbow Armadillo. I'm guessing it's some kind
Welcome.
of touristy thing. Had to buy weeds just to get everything right. I don't want to buy weeds.
Please come again.
Yeah. So let's make a Batgirl. The thing about Batgirl is so many different costumes and stuff. I can just make up my own stuff. If I base it on Batman. Oh no, wait, not on my system. If I base it on Batman, can I change the gender? I don't think I can. What if I say done? And then I go back and edit. this is gonna be tricky because she has hair.
My name is Batgirl.
Sticking out the back. Alright, I can do this. I've only seen her date males. Okay. I just want to go back to editing. Alright. So. See what's happening there. The skin is black. And so let's make her, she's kind of a purplish. And then this is gonna be tricky. Thank you, Luis. We're changing him into Batgirl. This kind of purple. Yeah. Thanks for joining. I gotta ask how you found this. I think a lot of people are just cruising the Tomodachi game. So trying to talk. That's not right. How do I match that purple? Oh, there's skin right there. That would be easy. The whole thing of being able to create characters based on what kind of people you have. So I could make so many Batman. It'd be fun to do Zora in Ours costume. Let's make this a bit rounder. No real reason. Now. She has her. I can't make her nose unpurple now. I have to draw her nose in. She has her nose exposed. I can figure this out. Yeah, I'll have to draw her nose in. That's wrong. I keep thinking it's going to be flesh tone underneath, but it's not. Alright. I thought I was on straight. The demo, yeah, that kind of, man, it's bleak to think about. Because you're having three characters. I was just thinking about how, in mine, they were just playing on the beach, kicking a ball back and forth, and no buildings, no clothes, because it would lobotomize them. I'm going to be going back and forth on the face paint. So nose, I'm going to say none right now. I'm going to draw them in. Let's give her a mouth. I don't think of her as having lipstick, you know. But I guess that's not real, you know, just a mouth. I've made a crapload of DC superheroes. Batman, obviously. I have a list at the bottom there. Superman, Lois had a baby. Supergirl, I got Robin in there. Luthor. I got Firestorm is a childhood favorite. I'm trying to make the original Justice League, so I've got Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Man, Martian Manhunter. She does have her pupils out. I'm gonna say black. Robin, Gnort, here we go, Metamorpho. The list is scrolling at the bottom of the screen. Yeah. Let's change the eyebrows. So the eyebrows were way down. Sorry, I haven't decided on eyes yet. She's more, yeah. Yeah, this is coming along. I changed the actual face size. Yo, that's a mess with the paint. That's fine though. Let's go back to the paint. Lord Deathman? Yeah. The Japanese villain from the manga. Lord Deathman. Yeah. I was thinking of putting him. I don't want to make it too Batman heavy, but he's also got that cool lady, the girl sidekick. They're like, yeah, Lord Deathman's great. What a good design. I don't know if I could. I don't know if I could make that into me. What am I doing here? Let's get rid of this whole bottom part. Oh no, it's too much. It might have been easier to just start from scratch. But I've got the mask there. Let's do that. Slowly chisel away. And I'm only doing one side because I can mirror later. That's too high now. Okay. I don't want that. The lock transparency is great, because it means I can draw just on what I've drawn before. No, I'm trying to make Batgirl. Maybe at some point, but I'm not making him right now. Sorry. So I just started with the Batman mask. This bit needs to come away as well. Oh, that's not okay. Just don't have enough ladies on my island right now. Yeah, no, it's fine. So I want to erase. That's the biggest eraser you've got. What's the biggest circle? I want. Not erase. But how big is this brush? No. Let's go shape. Yeah, this is what I want. So let's actually cut out around her eyes. I need to pull up some reference. Yeah, I need to pull up some reference. The thing is, she has had so many different looks. Okay, this is the one I want. How do I save? Sure. And then bear with me. I'm sorry. Now that image is that. Hopefully. Whoops. God damn it. This image. No, that's a website. There we go. Here we go. Sorry. Here we go. That's what I'm looking for. All right. All right. Let's get just probably. Isn't this the one? Yeah. This design was really big when it came out. I'm probably older than everyone watching, but when this came out, there was a whole thing of everyone doing their own versions. And it was kind of, everyone was really happy because it was practical, which is not something you see a lot in especially female characters. Alright, I'm gonna undo what I just kind of did, and then on touchscreen I can stretch certain things, but I don't know how to do that here. So this goes there, and then let's do it again. Oh, her ears are out. The thing is, I treat it like fan art. I don't have to kind of make things accurate. See, this is more blue than purple. I might actually change the color. Let's do that, and then let's go back to stamping a circle. Right trigger does the eyedropper. Something I kind of. So that goes how it was, but then also pointy at the bottom. Really big, so our eyebrows are even in there. It doesn't get pointy. The holes are round, but the opinion on Terry McGinnis. I just finished watching all of Batman Beyond about a month ago. Kind of the first time, I caught it here and there when it was on. I like him. I think when it first came out, I didn't really give it a shot because it was like they cancelled the whole Batman, like that whole animated series, to make Batman Beyond, and that kind of bummed me out. But I did end up like, yeah, I like him. I like that they didn't go. There's a way to make that kind of character very annoying, and they kind of avoided that. Just that whole thing of I think Batman was good to it. Like they could have made Bruce Wayne like just hate Yumio. But they didn't. Hey, got some spam trying to get through. Yeah, Terry McGinnis is good. I don't know if I'd put him in here. It'd be fun to make. So many of them I'd love to make, you know. There's too many Batman characters I want to put in. I could have made this just a Batman Island. Favorite non-DC Marvel superhero? I'm not really reading anything currently that is not that. I loved Powers. That was a old Image comic. It was more kind of, it was about cops in a superhero world. They did make a horrible show out of it. I didn't see much of it. What else is there? I feel like there's something really obvious that's not. That's not coming to mind. I'm enjoying the Invincible show. I've never read the comic. This is coming on. I think I'm gonna make it darker. The purple's a bit weird. I'm not familiar with All Might. I was talking earlier about I'm making a tabletop role-playing game that is superheroes. So it's just been very on the brain more than usual. Copy that, flip that. That's good. I'm happy with that. It's a bit Catwoman-y. I think that's fine. So I gotta give her some flesh ears. Oh, there's like a pixel of skin color there somewhere. Where is that? There. Yeah. Looks a bit huntress. Yeah, it's gotta be darker. So that blue, it's black with a blue shine. I think I'm just gonna make it dark blue. Yeah. Not happy with this bit. Thank you for following, Leonevoli. What brings you to my Tamagotchi stream? I'm currently making Batgirl. Just shaving down her face. Yeah, My Hero Academy. Yeah, that's not something I'm very cross with. I'm old. I used to hate when people said that, but no, it's too true. I'm not gonna match that color. I'm gonna have to draw her mouth in. Squeeze all these parts to fit. Ah, so she's got green eyes in this picture. That makes sense. She is a redhead. I don't know about the black on there. Is that here? Yeah. No. Alright, I'm not settled on eyes. So what's All Might? Is he got like a gimmick? Like Superman butt? He's this or that? Or is it? Right, is he just Superman? Orange eyebrows. Let's go that one. They have to fit in the mask. Cool. Ah, cool. I gotta draw those in. Cool, yeah. I didn't mean that he has a gimmick. More like, what's the thing that separates him from Superman? I guess that's it. Black. I feel like drawing those on here is rough. It's also not something you can move as well as the nose is not. What I'll try to do is and then this isn't gonna work. This isn't gonna work. Kinda. The injury essentially puts him in the weakened form most of the time while limiting. Okay. That's good. Now I wish I could select just the black bits. Oop. Alright. Oh no, giving her a terrible mustache. Don't cancel me. Yeah. Yeah. I do this, give her a little, give her a cute little button nose. I think I'm okay with that. Alright. Can I try and... Oh yeah, here we go, skin. Yeah. Now... mouth. How about I turn the lipstick off? Oh, no. Is My Hero Academy, is it like is everyone a supporting character, or are they mains? I think I'm happy with this. Ears, that's right. And hair. Nearly didn't get it. Oh, her ears are blue because that's her skin color, right? That's actually fine. Hair. Alright. I would love if there was... Alright. And is it... Is it school heavy? Is that what academia? I think that's my I don't think I can watch things that are school based. Although school superheroes maybe. Very school, yeah. It's not a deal breaker, it's more... How far back can I make that hair? I would love no fringe at all. I think that's gonna have to be it, but maybe it'll look better with long hair. Does that change everything? Kinda. Yeah, I like that. She has a wavy, that's a good, that's her hair. Oh, no. Maybe. Maybe. Is that the longest hair? Yeah, I think that's good. Maybe I don't want subcolor. I think that's good. I didn't look at that reference for the nose. And also the eyes, she's got a bit of that. Yeah. Hello, ears. Yes, I'm making a Batgirl. Well, that brings you to the stream. Looks like everyone's just looking up Tamagotchis. This bit's not important. No. Okay. So I can't quite do the ears. I'm not happy with that nose. She's got kind of red lips in that. I have a few red lip characters already. I like it. Let's do this nose properly. So you can't have the me nose because the skin color is black, bluish. I would prefer anyone talk a lot than not chat on the stream. Thank you for talking a lot. It's good to just know about different stuff. I know what My Hero Academia is, but I'm not, you know, I'm not well versed. It's good to hear from a fan. Because I like superheroes, but it'd be nice to know stuff that isn't friggin' DC superhero, and I think I don't have to ask whether you prefer Marvel or DC. I grew up DC, is the thing. I would never get into a fight over anyone is better than the other, you know. I don't care enough. I'm too old for that, right? My heroes are, yeah, okay. Yeah, I was just saying that. Yeah, I love superheroes and I love Japanese stuff. I'm not. I haven't seen a lot of stuff, but why wouldn't I like that? I think it's just such a time sink. If I look it up, it's going to be thousands of episodes, right? I think that's a better nose. I'm never going to be completely happy. So it's been a while waiting to, yeah. Man. I'm not going to say anything bad about piracy. Which characters do you have already? I've got a list scrolling down there, but yeah, DC superheroes, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Supergirl. Hang on, I'm done here, and I'll go through the list. Oh, here we go. We got Poison Ivy, Superboy, who was born on this island, Darkseid, Batgirl. I don't need this reference anymore. Aquaman, the guy on the very right is Tiny. That's my own character. I wish Batman was here to compare. I think she's a bit shorter than Lois. A bit thinner than Batman. That's right, I was using Batman's stats as her. Let me hear it. She didn't say it. He didn't say it. I've stopped ever downloading stuff piracy, but there's a lot of pirate streaming stuff. I feel like I shouldn't be talking about this on stream. Dating preferences, male. I've never seen her with a female. I could be wrong. I have a spreadsheet with everyone's birthday. That was how I dealt with the weight of this game. Waiting for this game to come out nearly killed me. Batgirl. So some of these are canon, some of them I had to make up, and I didn't label who was who. So I got her as the 23rd of the 9th. And the age? 25 I've put. Because I was thinking probably the other Batgirls. Yeah, 25. No, if I put more Batgirls there, younger.
My name is Batgirl.
My name is Batgirl.
My name is
My name is Batgirl. It's nice to meet you. Today is a my name is Batgirl. 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 My name is My name is Batgirl. My name is Batgirl. It's nice to meet you. Today is April 25th, 2026.
I was playing the demo on
So, how does this voice
separate
sound?
profiles. So
My name is Batgirl. It's nice to meet you.
Oh no,
My name is Batgirl.
that's Batgirl.
My name is Batgirl. My name is Batgirl. It's nice to meet you. My name is Batgirl. My name is Batgirl. My name is Batgirl. My name is Batgirl. my name is my name is Batgirl.
It's hard to.
It's nice to meet you. My name is Batgirl. My name is
It's
Batgirl.
hard to make separate, like
My name is
voices for
Batgirl.
each
It's
character.
nice to meet you. Today is April 25th,
Try not to have them all
2026.
sound the same. No, she's not related to anyone. Quick. So quick, I'm thinking Superman is second, Flash is there. This is human quick. She's polite. She's very polite. She's got a lot of energy. This is kind of halfway. Serious? She's more chill than serious. She's not quirky. She's not normal either. You have to be a bit quirky, right? I think that's good. Oh, hang on, because this was based on Batman, yeah. Oh, no. I thought everything was going to be set to... Okay, here we go. Oh, that's nice music. I don't think I've got this personality before. Cool. So I'll set her. So this is Gotham City down here. She lives next to Robin. And there's Arkham Asylum there. Batman himself lives it with the other superheroes. I'd love to have a full Batman house. Yeah, let's get rid of this spot here with rocks. Decisions. Thanks for following. Ah, there's room here too. Alright. I don't like us being so close to Arkham. Let's do that. Let's have some space in between. Let's have 3 space in between. I'll fix that up later.
You're
They all
Mr.
made
Right.
call me Mister.
It's nice to meet you. I'm Batgirl. I'm a considerate daydreamer. I know I look like I have it all together, but I've been known to overthink
She talks
things
so
now and
slow.
then. I hope we get along well.
Shall we go right into making a costume?
Take it slow.
No, but
There's
talk
no
a bit.
need to rush.
But talk a bit faster. First, we gotta rub her head for luck. And then we have to feed her. Today's zucchini day, it was on special.
Yum.
Oh, it's after 5. That means the night market's open. Oh, changed it. The reason I haven't changed this because I get to the point where each character gives you their own nickname, so I'm not fussed. What do we want for her room? There's been no cave yet. I'd love a cave. She's a librarian, so I know I have a books one. Oh, I don't have a books one.
Welcome.
That's my character comics face there. I'm currently married to a cowboy. Here we go. That kind of books. That kind of books. That. This kind of books.
Thank you very much. Please come again.
That's Batgirl. Although presents would have been a nice. The presents. Oh. See, I wasn't. That's a lie. I was gonna say I wasn't planning full DC playthrough, but of course I am. I am on here as well. Me and my real life wife.
It looks great now. Thank you.
I'm gonna go straight to making her an outfit. Clothes and then create. I guess we bring that reference back. Small, and then let's start with the top. I wish there were onesies. Put that there. I have to try and color match her skin. Was it that? You can make. You can make anything real. It will be flat. If I look, I haven't started yet. Custom pants, yes. I'll show you. Create. Take this off for 1 second. So, we got T tank top long sleeve. Yeah, the pants are here. Pants. If you see any of my characters, they're even hats and dresses. Two-face. Yeah. You could make a two-face. So you use the long sleeve top there, and draw in the suit and tights. Some of them have templates. Yeah. So this, look, you've already got a suit there, and you just draw in that. Yeah. I haven't really used these templates yet. Let's look. Hang on. Nah. So the cape is going to be trouble. So I've just been drawing the capes on the back. But this bit with the buttons near the neck's going to be a bit of a pain. So nothing has a zip like she does. Sorry. Right, that's what I was doing. I reckon this. skin color. Yeah, I'm gonna say yeah. I loved Animal. Yeah, Animal Crossing customization was great. I wish I could change. I can't change the hand colors in this, so she's not gonna have yellow gloves. And there was something else. There was something else that bothered me. But mostly, I'm loving the customization. See, she's got the belt. Start on the top there. I'm gonna just put that all in the pants. This isn't gonna be. Oh. Yeah, I've been adding cuffs on everything. What you can also do is I can find my Batman outfit and you just stamp it right on there. And then I can edit there. Just means I don't have to draw the symbol again. And the cape's already there. I will have to change a lot. But, the symbol is a bit different, isn't it? Yeah, let's go there. Let's start with the gloves, actually. Yeah, I'm pretty smart, thanks. I'm not a fan of Absolute Batman. I feel like I've seen it all before. I'm old. Yeah, I don't know. Of the absolute ones, I love the Martian Manhunter one. Wonder Woman was pretty good. I need to be reading that. I don't like, because I read the first few issues, and it was the whole thing of he's friends with every villain before they become villains is a bit, I don't know, I'm not a fan of that. Something about it. That's a very different symbol. And there was a whole thing of when it launched, it was like, oh, it's Batman, but he's not rich, he doesn't have all the money. And then the second issue they show his Batmobile and it's that giant thing. I was like, this isn't what he said. I'm trying to cheat. But no, that doesn't work. It's not censored at all. It's very ridiculous. I think stuff like that happens a lot where it's for people who haven't read it before, which is cool. But I have read them before. Hush was like that, and everyone loved it, and it felt like a best of, where like, I've seen all this before. Yeah. The axe thing and the I think if you're gonna redo Batman, make it better. Make it, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I I think there's stuff they hold on to for no reason other than it's just been there forever, like Batman and Superman. And then if you're gonna redo it, get rid of that stuff. His costume should be insane, like, rather than, I mean, I know his costume is, but his costume is still not a bat, if you know what I mean? A dude who's got billions of dollars, and that's the best that's the scariest outfit you can make. But like, they hold on to that because you have to, but you guys, this is the most I've talked about comics in real life forever. I don't know very much about the chick. I saw the picture, the poison ivy as well. I think it's meant to be like edgy, like, but yeah, absolutely, yeah. I read the first at least 2 issues, and I get, but like, why? How does he have that giant thing? Is that a construction worker? I guess it is a construction worker vehicle. If that's the excuse, then fine, I take that, but still. But also in the regular Batmans, we had a whole thing where he didn't have money for a while. And that was cool. So that's not the gimmick. That's not the, you know, why not just read a real Batman? Is there, is his size, is that the costume or is that him? How does he have a secret identity? Is that accurate there? Yeah. It's him. So do people not know? How do people not know it's him? Is the thing. Yeah, the cape bit's gonna be. Yeah. I don't want to nitpick. Especially if it's a Batman, like, yeah. I don't think I've seen the Two-Face. They're all interesting designs, like, interesting isn't the problem. Not that I think there's a problem, it's just not for me. I'm really liking the current, I might have seen it today. I'm really liking the current Matte Fraction Batman. Oh, look at that, they're different sizes on the actual thing. Oh yeah, no, yeah, I have seen that. Yeah. Yeah. Plus flip. So that's why trying to get things symmetrical. There in the 90s there was oh, I can't do that next stuff. Can't do that color. In the 90s there was a artist, Christian Alamy, and he did a Joker story where he was tripping out, and it looked a lot like that Two-Face design. Just very long hair, just a lot of white skin, a lot of naked muscles. That's what that reminded me of. So the Two-Face design. I can't get this symmetrical. Come on. All right. So what this does is screw up the symbol a little bit. See, that's not symmetrical angle, that's alright. That doesn't bother me. She looks like a guitar. A zip. Where's everyone from, by the way? Saturday for you? Saturday afternoon? Putting too much into this. Yeah, but yeah, I know about zippers. I don't think that shows up on her costume though. Yeah, that's beautiful. She's got two there as well. Let's copy this. Put it here. And actually the zippers hang down the top a bit. No, same size there. I didn't make a Two-Face yet. That would be fun. Like, I'm trying not to do too Batman heavy, but there are just so many Batman supporting characters and villains. Is this the bottom? Alright, let's just go on a 45 degree. saw someone make a really cool Bane. I'd like to make Bane just because of the size. I'd like to have more big fellas. It's just kind of the same thing with Batgirl, where she's had so many designs that you can kind of pick and choose your favorite bits out of each one. Even though right now I'm making the one, yeah. The thing about Bane, it's hard to make pupilless eyes that aren't white, so to make his big red. I might have to go with the animated version where he's got the second animated version, he's got those strange eyes. I'm liking this. I should. I should tuck. You can tuck her top in, and then half the zip is gone. That's what that yellow line is. Alright, I need to move this up. You can't make characters all that big though. I've made like a dark side and stuff. The Lego game, I'm trying to picture Bane. I like the new animated. By that, the Bruce Timm animated one, but the second redesigns there, that's a good Bane. Like, it's very gimp-ish. He's got like studded colours and zips. I think he's got a zip for a mouth. I kind of like that. The Telltale series was fun. It was like kind of suited his character was more Mexican wrestler-y. Like just a bunch of tattoos, big mustache. I don't think I'll do that, but the new Batman, yeah, I like how simple it is, but it's one of those things where normally I love the original, the comics, what it's based on, but the comics I don't like the original Batman, the Bane design. So for her back, you don't get any of the yellow because the yellow's on the inside. You like when the mask is closed? Yeah. I guess I do too. I do like seeing the eyes though. Mouth I don't care about, but I like Bane's. I don't like that big red lens. I don't think that's very... because it looks very luchador, but then when you cover it up, it doesn't. I'm gonna see what it looks like if how getting the cape to join front and back is difficult, yeah. Say here, and then so you can see where the line matches, and then you fill it in. Yeah, I'm saying I don't like it. I don't like the original comic design. It's the whole shirtless that's probably more of a problem than mask. Just the weird like straps that just barely cover him. I'm not a fan. Just have no shirt if you're gonna do that. What's it? Yellow. I want to see what it looks like. I did this with rub and it didn't actually look that good. I think I'm gonna have to go with no yellow. Because that's on the inside and we don't see the inside. And she has yellow, she'll have enough yellow on her outfit. Oh, that's good, that's the first one that looks like clothes. Yeah. And pants are gonna be a lot silly. Is that black stripes down the pants? This is a bat. Girl. Top. Trunks on Superman, yes.
Batgirl top.
Yes. It just design-wise, you don't want, yeah. I like it. I haven't changed. That could be for anyone. Yeah. Let's make the pants before. I can't. It's not letting me. So these are my outfits. We got Supergirl's skirt, Aquaman's, Superboy, Darkseid, Martian Manhunter. I tried to make a Firestorm flame thing, I didn't make. Robin, Batman, Metamorpho, Firestorm, Knot, Wonder Woman. I didn't think I could do the skin color, but then I made that, so she has bracelets now. So that's all of them. So I've put trunks on. I've put trunks on him. Yeah. What did I do? Did I buy it? Not a Two-Face outfit. I don't know what you saw. Let's go back to the shop. Ah, that's Metamorpho. He's just naturally like that. Let's make the pants. This should be a lot quicker. So you also got, yeah, you can make Two-Face's outfit out of all these. Let's stamp the top I just made, just for color matching. Yeah, that looks weird. Oh yeah, I'll just shrink these. Two-Face is fun. I'd like to make, yeah, I'd like to make Two-Face. I'm not gonna, don't have yellow boots in the shop. I think I'm gonna, yeah, I think I'm gonna just do that all. Alright. Just gonna give it a bit of yellow there. I might have yellow socks, but they don't go on top of the pants. Alright, this belt's gonna be fun. Actually, let's do the black first. It's on the outside of the leg. That's not enough. Yeah, it's good. interesting making Two-Face, mainly because the skin color, it's gonna, if I do a green or red, you'll still see skin color there. You can't do it exact. And the hair is gonna be basically impossible. Although I made Firestorm and his whole thing is his head's on fire. And you can only really see it from the front. But is it just one leg? Oh yeah, of course. But I got used to it. It would drive me mad if I was trying to do everything super accurate, you know. Oops. That goes all the way. Yeah, see, I think if I were to make... yeah, I get what you're saying. If you did Two-Face and you draw on the scarred side, that's the bit that wouldn't move. But I think that's kind of accurate almost. That belt's gonna be a trouble. Yellow. I'm gonna pick this yellow. Now the belt is a weird thing because you see the top of it doesn't actually show up on there. Lego Batman 2 Two-Face. I don't really remember it. Is he the Billy D. Williams? There's a whole thing where, yeah, they were, Billy D. Williams was Harvey Dent in the '89 Batman movie. And then everyone just kind of forgot it, and then it just kind of showed up in media. It was like, oh, but what if he did do it? What if he did get to play him? Cool. Oh, that pouch is on the belt. It's gonna be a lot straighter then. I didn't do the bottom of her top. It's alright. Alright, it doesn't have to be that straight. I don't know why I'm doing that. Let's start again. I could just do this, but I could just do that bit later. Alright, it's gonna be tricky. I knew it was gonna be tricky though. I'm not gonna worry about the back for now. So So, I want the belt. I think that's the right size. It's quite thin. I want it that color, and I want it. So that's the high point on the hip there. Oh, see, that's too thick already. How's that? Yeah. It's a very thin belt. Alright. Yeah, that's good. The problem is not being able to see the top of pants. So, how's that? Nope. I'll figure it out. Now is that point the lowest? Alright, that there is where the... That's pretty low. But now I know where the... Yeah, alright. Alright. I'm figuring it out. There we go. Alright. I'm happy with that. Now there's this. To the side of it, yeah. Have you seen some Two-Face memes? Alright, that is... That is... Does that join to... Is that joined to this? Is that the inner leg? No, it's the wrong leg. Yeah, alright. We're getting somewhere. And the top of the belt I'll worry about. That's clever. Gotta make that match with the top of the pouch. Yeah. Too little. Things on this side. Put the other one on her butt. Yeah. I'll make them different sizes just for fun. Doing this does make you think a lot about designs and stuff. Batgirl. So I've been doing dark yellow for stuff like this, but I don't know how much I like doing that. So that's green. Yeah, I'm alright. I like it. thanks for being here. I'll be doing this every now and then. Pretty much as I can. Goodbye. Thank you. Don't want to be that dude, but follow. You'll know when I'm always up for talking about this stuff. That was fun. So I'm not gonna get too detailed. I think that makes it kind of gross. Then this. Let's make that there, yeah, and then that starts above there. I didn't put anywhere near as much detail on Batman stuff. That's gonna bother me that it's not centered a bit. Let's do a bit of so where's that in the middle? Let's do a bit of this stuff. Yeah. Very too much detail makes it a bit muddy. Because when I do writing on objects, it goes all awful. I don't want that to happen here. Little dots. Belts have dots. There's a bit here where there's a loop. Alright, and then this is gonna be great. So it's like one of these, and then basically a line across. This makes me kind of want to redo my Batman with actually referenced belt loops and stuff. Yeah, I like that. Yep. So next up, not today, but I will like to make Flash and Hal Jordan. I want to make Hal Jordan, lots of other Green Lanterns. Is this? So that makes makes the rest of the belts plain. I'd love if all the Justice League lived together. Yeah, that's good. I might as well do a bit of... Yeah, see, all this is gonna look boring now. Is that something? Yeah. Can't wait to see her dressed up in this. I wish I had yellow boots though. This is gonna be hard for her to reach. And then you do a bit of this. And maybe a bit of that. I think that's it. So the bit where the top meets the pants, that I didn't put that in. Maybe that's gonna be alright. This is Batgirl pants. I still haven't checked the market.
Batgirl pants.
Girl. Alright, now let's see how to wear them. Gonna buy them. Also see if there's yellow. No, there's no yellow boots. No. It's these. Maybe socks will do. Let's try all of these. That wasn't very yellow. That's the right color. Yeah. Now, let's see what happens. Yeah, tuck that in. Oh, yeah. I like it. Hang on. Alright, I thought the black line. Alright, that's good. I just don't have the bit where her top meets. Oh, it's not good. Nope. Better. I think it's gonna have to be socks. I think it's gonna have to be socks. I'm gonna fix it up, but maybe not right now. Yeah, yeah. Alright. Let's check in on everyone. Someone was asking who else I had. I don't know if they're still around. It was a long time ago. Let's go to the market before I do anything.
Welcome in.
Ooh, I don't have that color. Don't have that color.
Thanks a bunch. Be sure to stop by again tomorrow.
So who's having problems? Wonder
Hello. I think Lois and Comic Space would be best
No.
friends. Yeah, you're right. They each probably have enough
It's a long
friends.
time before I started saying no to anyone.
Whenever someone says, I've got to tell you about this dream, get ready for a really boring story.
All you guys do all day is dream and make me look at them. No, it's my favorite.
Hey there. I'm hungry.
I'm getting really fuzzy. You're hungry. It's zucchini day.
Yum.
I'm sorry, I'm getting very fuzzy. I think that's probably better.
I keep my house in my pocket at all times. Never know when a need will arise.
This is where the lingo stuff is messed up. Where's lingo? He asked me what I would buy. And I said house, and now he has a house in his pocket. Poison ivy. Oh. What if Batgirl, the first person you meet is poison ivy?
Are you in trouble?
Please, Hick, help me.
So first I do this, then this.
Oh, I think you're onto something. You're a real lifesaver, dear.
I'm just happy I could help.
Cool.
What's the matter? Wrinkle check.
Alex is my wife, IRL. Come on, why am I see-through? That's how cat guts be. Alright, that's gonna have to do. There's something I can do.
Got. Ahoy, hoy, other husband? I've been thinking it might be time
No.
for I and me to move into a new home. What do
We
you
live
think?
with my two ICs who are also married.
Yeah, you're right.
Excuse me 1 second, I'm gonna try and fix this green screen. I just need to turn another light on. Okay. Ah, that's so much better. Hang on a second. Okay. I'm back. Yeah, it's looking a lot better. We just have. Alright. What's Alex
Tell
doing?
me, how would you feel if you saw someone wearing some Batgirl pants?
I only just made them. Darkseid, ruler of apocalypse. A pet? His voice is messed up. I've got so many silly pets. No. A robot? I think a robot would be good actually. I don't know what that is. Maybe that. Jellyfish. Oh no, all the sea creatures are going to Aquaman. Robot. I've changed that before.
I tend to get a little obsessive
Can I
once
change
my
his
mind is
outfit?
latched
Why
onto
is it so
something.
purple? You need food. You've had zucchinis.
Yum.
Really level 2. So giving him a creepy voice. I like that. That's scary. I'm gonna change his outfit. It is a dress.
I feel like I'm becoming my true self more and more.
Alright, let's deal with everyone else first. What's Metamorpho? What's Metamorpho doing? Oh, group game.
Huh? Let's play no repeats with a group. No
I love
repeats.
that Firestorm
Food.
outfit so much.
Salisbury steak.
Cinnamon roll?
Fun cake.
Gratin. I don't know what gratin is.
Ravioli.
Stolen?
Nachos.
Ravioli style nachos. Truffle mushroom.
Waffle.
Baked beans?
Avocado.
Waffle, baked beans, avocado. Raclette.
Ice cream cone.
Yeah, I am a pretty big
Potato chips?
Pastel de nata.
Ice cream, chips, scrambled eggs.
Raclette.
Raclette was a repeat.
Raclette. Never had the raclette, but I love the idea of it.
Congratulations, you won.
Thank you. Which one should I
Time
go
for your prize. Go ahead, pick one.
Okay, I'm gonna start small. I nearly got a stick. My cat's yelling at the door. If he does it again, I have to get it. Excuse me. Getting hectic out there. Been streaming for nearly 3 hours. Might take a bit of a break.
Bored. We could try bowling to pass the time.
Sure. See he's got there's a blue that looks purple in, but not always. He's got on his boots there. Alright. Oh my goodness. I have gotten a strike on here before. I'm a bit of an elite gamer, you could say. There we go. So let's go for middle.
Congratulations, you won.
A pig. I don't think I have any of those things. So one more person has a problem. Wonder Woman. You want something stupid out there.
Do you have a moment? I would just love it if there were a bonfire right here.
Sure, that's not that stupid actually. Sorry I said that one.
That's so satisfying. Thank you.
Luther
I
and
love living on
Joker.
Supertown.
So let's get the pallet house. I want to. It does look purple, doesn't it? That is purple. Yeah. I swear I never drew that as purple. Let's have a look at you again. Yeah, it looks better. I think I've done all my things that I was gonna do. I made my Batgirl. Oh, thank you. Where is she? Yeah, the outfit. I don't have good yellow shoes, so she's wearing socks, but I'm really happy with that. She hasn't met Batman. Just walk right into his room. Oh, he's in the kitchen.
Are these bits of cat piss can?
We haven't met yet, have we? My name is Batgirl.
Hiya. I'm Batman.
I was going off. Still have the picture here somewhere.
Sparkle, I've tuned Princy, I've tuned
It's going off that design.
I've tuned on a Sardifer.
So I'd like all
Probably
the
that.
Batman characters to live in one house eventually.
Blue. Ringle checks demand. Hey, from Lock.
Salad clever. Samslum.
What's Lex Luthor dreaming about? We've all seen this, right? Some of them have little changes, but not this one.
Did you want to talk? Ah. Oh,
I've not given
it was
these
just a dream.
binoculars to anyone.
Oh. What's up?
Here's
I
Big
saw a
Me.
comic space comic the other day, and it got me thinking. How many of those do you own, mister?
Comic Space is a comic that I made, so although I've sold out.
So you have a lot. Can I have one?
Maybe I should make one in the game. You look hungry. I'm gonna give you string cheese.
Only the best for me.
To try to make the interior kind of Fortress of Solitude without actually deciding well. He lives with Superman and Lois and Superboy.
You know, I feel like you and I have become very close, mister. Can I give you a special nickname that only I will use?
Sure. Here's Superman. He's a bit insulty. What would he call me? He would not call me Mister. Call me Captain.
Captain, having a nut. Captain. That suits you so well. Don't let any of the others call you that, alright?
Yeah, I love that they all live
Luthor,
together.
it's super to see you. Well, if it isn't Superman. Tylantha, right.
Hey
Party
guys,
on a
gonna watch
burger
some
name.
TV.
Yes, Cerrone. Spanchafilla. Yeah, grab and snap elbow. Me. Bap.
What a clipping.
And that's it, Twindoodle, that's Sepple Pack. Crunchy.
What are they doing?
So first, live up tuna with Jack Solo.
Peppers.
Barn
They all
Clam.
drink peppers.
Well anyway, Shun Seed Raven, Infamy. My love Pondy plays it tomorrow.
Joker.
Huh?
He wants to build something
Do
stupid.
you have a moment? I would just love it if there were a retro street lamp right here.
Okay, Joker. So here I didn't design his clothes. There's enough purple. Yeah, they all look the same. Same, honestly.
Well, that's a big improvement. Ha ha.
He's gonna love it. There's a lamp right there. There's a street light right there. Alright. What's Harley Quinn up to?
Huh. How do you do,
I've
Mr.
seen screenshots you can buy that mask. You don't have to. I don't have to draw it on everyone. That's all store-bought clothes as well. Right.
Ha ha ha. My room
I
could
was
use a new
thinking
vibe.
that. I was thinking that. I like maybe still party, but change the I want something kind of yeah, how about this? Just a back alley party. I want something filthy, like gross. Like, why would you have a party here? Yeah, kind of. Graveyard party. Nah, I think the haunted blue. I didn't change the floor. That's not what I chose. Oh, come on, man. Is that the haunted manor? That looks like the book room.
Yeah, this is different. Thank you. Tee hee hee.
Maybe this is the haunted manor. Let me look around.
Ha ha ha. Comic Space sounded really interested in making jokes when we talked. I think we'll become best friends. Tee hee hee.
I didn't mean to give her a library.
Ha. Welcome to the home of Arkham Asylum inmates.
Alright. Harley Quinn's room. Wallpaper. That is the haunted manor set. Alright. I'm gonna buy some.
Welcome.
I'm gonna buy there's like an inmate one. Could do the graffiti. This one.
Thank you very much. Please come again.
Yeah. It's just a party in a little crap house. Sure. What a cool party.
Yeah, this is different. Thank you. Tee hee hee.
Who else has problems? Doesn't look like anyone. Let's start feeding. Let's check in on Batgirl. should meet Supergirl. Alright, just hanging out by the toilets.
Mr.
Supergirl. Yeah, cool.
We haven't met yet, have we? My name is Batgirl.
Hey, Batgirl. I'm Supergirl.
What a good game.
Imagine for me to Batman tomorrow, Tito. And that's the twin doodle at double tax, Frenchie.
Gotta check my fountain. Did I really run out of stuff to, I didn't see what Jacob was doing. Am I 100? Oh. I've bought everything. Let me double check. Ticks. I've bought everything, so I'm just gonna have to go and travel. Dancing while walking, yeah, that's how he walks. See these new guys, they go by themselves. I don't like that. Let's try Firestorm. Who are you gonna take?
Well, a Western Europe, sure. I'm super excited.
Gnaw is
Thanks so
a
much.
Green Lantern from a dog planet
This is going
He's
to
my
be so
favorite.
much fun.
from the 80s. Comic relief guy. Here we go. That's cool. You can't make a ring. So yeah, just draw his cover.
Big Ben. That's the bell. This London landmark is called Elizabeth Tower.
Say cheese.
His whole thing is that everyone hates him and can't put up with it.
You can't visit Venice, Italy, without going for a float in the canals.
Say cheese.
Is that all?
Romantic and pointy. This is France's famed Eiffel Tower.
Say cheese.
So maybe if I go on every tour, I unlock something.
That was a wonderful trip. Thanks so much
French
for letting me
antenna.
take it. This souvenir is for you.
Oh. Ooh. How is that? Is that food? Gotta be a food. I'd love a cheese board. He has all the
I speak with a loud.
I won't have.
I speak with a radiant voice. I speak with a radiant voice.
He's a sports guy. He's got a soccer ball and a baseball. He's also a teen, so let's say street dance. Give him a street dance DVD.
Thank you.
Also, he doesn't have yellow boots. I need yellow boots in my shop.
I wasn't sure how it'd go, but I got Suits and Metamorpho to meet, and they hit it off.
You're hungry. There's the cheese board. Your favorite is macaroni and cheese.
Welcome.
Let's get 5 of those. Let's get one of everything here.
Thank you very much.
I'm very pretty much playing it like money's not an option,
Yum.
not a problem. But then there was an outfit that was like $6,000. There's a few things that are really pricey. That's his favorite ever.
It's so good.
This is why you gotta feed them different things and find out what their favorite is. But you can't feed them two in a row. It's such a good game. I can't give him another one, but I can give him dessert. They still got two of these.
Yum.
He eats like a teenager. He hated crepes. Made him almost die. Who else has got problems? So this is the superhero headquarters.
Yo.
I'm Batman.
Imagine for me this Batman tomorrow. CISO. Teledramp Woogle and Twoo. So I said,
Floating is a quirk, so when I level up, what did I just do? That when I gave him the street dance thing, I could give him little quirks, but I've kind of gave him all the ones I want, yeah. So a lot of them.
Label checks command.
Let's check out. So yeah, there's Superman.
What was I
floating.
doing again?
I think Superman's gonna meet them on the beach. Tiny, that's my own character, he does farts. What else is going on? They all get along. But try to...
Why does Batgirl look like some strawberry shortcake?
What? Oh, something's happening here.
Good evening, Supergirl.
Good evening, Batgirl.
That's fun cake on a starter. Sparkle.
She's scared of the cake I made up. That cowboy's my own character, his name's Tiny.
Thanks for that.
And I
I'm
put
a
two
lot
of my own
closer to
characters in, and
Supergirl now.
They got married instantly.
Shortcake. Yeah. Fantasilla.
Devil.
I was planning on doing a lot of my own characters, but then I just got sidetracked and there he is. Oh. I'll get your husband to fix that. But you're doing your own thing. I'm trying to kind of separate. I could have put myself there instead.
I didn't know you could be Pops.
This is just hick my life. Hick now.
I see. This is gonna take a lot of elbow grease.
It's okay.
Aw, I just cleaned my elbows. I owe you one.
I don't mind one bit. You heard?
Hiccups are
Double.
It's been a while since I've had hiccups.
Pepperoni.
Who else needs to meet? I want Whoa. Ghost Grace.
So, Julie's in charge over the Grand Prix.
I want Robin and Batman to actually act like father and son. Batman's there, where's Robin? Alright. Robin and Batgirl haven't met.
Good evening, Batman. Do you feel like talking about a wedding ring?
They asked me
Sure,
my most
I'm in.
valuable possession.
Wait,
and I said wedding
has there
ring.
been some kind of news on that front or something?
You haven't heard. They found an ancient wedding ring here on Supertown that's supposedly 500 years old.
Wow. Really makes you wonder
Really
about what life
happy,
was like
got
back then.
his lies.
Hey, thanks for
Hard to
sparking my imagination, Robin.
Get pupilless eyes.
Huh? Of course.
In a different shape.
I guess that book on wedding ring trivia really paid off. If you want to hang out, I'd love to tell you more.
Nothing would make me happier.
Good friends. Good friends with his dad. I call him Dad.
Hey, Dad, long
But not with everyone else. No, he doesn't
I
call him
just
Dad,
met
he calls him
Batman.
Father.
Father, how goes it?
And he'll call him son. But not with everyone else.
Hey, son, long time.
Nice.
I've got plan.
Nice.
I knew my wedding ring knowledge would come in handy one day.
That son is a sharp one.
So this bit is where the quirks are. So he's got a greeting, he's got a different walks, and everything's floating. Eating. Gonna give making 3 tangerines.
I feel like I got one
Gonna
step
end the
closer to
stream
my
soon.
true self.
20 on the burger.
Let's
Oh,
solve problems. Let's end it clean.
Huh. Good evening. I've always admired smart people. And if I want
That's
people
the
to
thing
admire me,
about-
I've got to get smart.
That's the
Clothes.
thing about custom clothes.
I want some clothes that make me look smart.
What if I just sneaky change his socks? Got too many of those. Cool. She could wear casual clothes, I guess.
I heard Pee Wee Herman has some kind of coffee table book coming out soon.
Someone asked me what celebrity I like, and that's the best I could do.
Good evening. I want to be friends with Supergirl. What should we talk about?
Fighting crime. Running around. No, she flies. Flying around. Fighting crime.
Got it. I'll go talk to her about fighting crime. Good evening, Supergirl. Do you feel like talking about fighting crime?
I like those zips. I like those
Okay,
zips on their
but check
outfit.
this out. Visualize fighting crime. Who do you want to join you?
I mean, it's not just because you're asking, but I'd pick you.
Oh. Well, in that case, I'm gonna pencil you in for fighting crime ASAP.
They don't really have plans for these two. If they move in together, I don't know what I'll do. They call them by their first names.
Hey, Kara, long time no see. Have you met
And Barbara.
Barbara, how goes it? Batgirl is just the coolest.
It's funny these old
Nice.
characters. You
I
wouldn't
knew
call a
fighting
character
crime
Barbara
would bring
these
Kara
days.
and me together.
Makes sense. Barbara and I have the same taste in hobbies, so no wonder we hit it off.
How does she walk? How does she stand? So many, I think she's too normal. A nod.
Oh, I feel a little different. Hey, from what?
Who else has problems? I've got problems.
Has a gallon. I'm so hungry. Please feed me.
I need to eat in real life soon. Greek salad's my favorite.
Here we go.
Again, my favorite ever.
It's so food.
As for food, you get friggin' food. See, I've run out of things to give myself. Clothing. How about this?
Thanks for everything you do. This is a little gift from me. Comic Space talked to me, and I cracked up laughing.
Alright.
Comic Space has some
Solve
good stories.
problems and turn this off. One more check. Oh yeah, look at me go. That's what happens if you give them a hip hop DVD.
ha. Good evening, idiot. I think Firestorm and Lexi would be
No.
best friends.
No.
Yeah, you're right. They each probably have enough friends. Haha.
He's got
I'm
empty, he's
always
got
happy
empty
to
tummy.
see you, idiot.
Who'd I give the cheese board to?
Yum.
Fine. Alright, let's save it. Thanks everybody for watching. A lot of new people today. That's cool, that's what you want. That's what I want. Here we go. I need to change this to a Tomodachi thing. If you're watching this live, check me out. Check me out on Instagram and Blue Sky. Check ive.h.io for games, comics. If you're watching this live, check out Nonstop Hive on YouTube. I put these up. And if you're watching this on YouTube, check out Sarah Hive on Twitch. I think that's everything I have to plug. I want to fix this for next time. There we go. Yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for all the chats. Thanks for talking about Two-Face. Thanks for talking about My Hero Academy. Yeah, I'll be doing this again. Bye. Love you.